Hi, I'm Mr. Mullaney. This is our recap of Lesson 2 for the French Revolution, Creating a New France. The big idea here, the National Assembly instituted political and social reforms in the moderate first stage of the revolution. What you want to know here is that at the start, while it was liberal, it was a big change and it incorporated more rights for more people. It was relatively moderate. They were not about completely trashing the old order. They just want to make some significant but yet moderate changes. We'll talk about that. This lesson, we talk about popular revolts and how they contribute to the revolution, the moderate reforms enacted by the National Assembly. Remember, the National Assembly is formed by the Third Estate at the Estates General. Then they're locked out and they take that tennis court oath. And we're going to explain how foreign reaction to the revolution helped lead to war. Foreigners did not like what they were seeing in France at this time. So let's talk about King Louis XVI. He called an assembly of the Estates General. That should say Estates General. That's my bad. He had no idea what events would transpire. Why were they significant? They're significant for a few reasons. One, the Third Estate stands up for itself and says this isn't appropriate. We should have much more power in this body. The National Assembly is formed by the Third Estate, although they welcome members of other estates to the National Assembly. And so you start getting on a road to constitutional monarchy, where you have a king. You're going to have some sort of elected body. We'll talk about that in a minute. So you get revolts. You get political crisis and rising bread prices, the Great Fear. All right. There's rumors that the army is hoarding bread and grain. There are rumors. So what happens is peasants are attacking nobles. We talked about in class about bread, the lifeblood of the French peasant right here. Let me show you something. We learned that French peasants on average ate 2 pounds of this stuff a day. Well, one of these is right here in this picture. I recently took it Weaver's Way. And if I can get that little thing out of the way, that little display thing, my bad. But anyway, that's bread. That's the produce scale. And what you'll see is that that's less than 2 pounds. It's just less than 2 pounds. Each French peasant is eating about that much bread per day. Can you imagine? French peasants, really, that's a little excessive. I'm going to try a little right now. This looks great. They have a point. 2 pounds a day? I don't know if I would like that so much. Let me get this out of here. So bread prices go up, and these French peasants are really, really upset about that. Paris is armed, and the leadership of the city is taken over by what's called the Paris Commune, and they were not moderates like the bourgeoisie leading the National Assembly. They were radicals. The Marquis de Lafayette, very important figure, hero of two worlds, meaning, one more sip of coffee, clear that out. Way to go, Weaver's Way in Chestnut Hill, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. That was really good bread. Anyway, Marquis de Lafayette, he was a hero of the American Revolution. He came and he fought side by side with Washington. He was a member of the French nobility. He's a member of the Second Estate. He leads the National Guard. The National Guard is raising the tricolor. So they are sympathetic to the revolution, and they're helping to be a check on these King Louis troops, essentially, to make sure that bread isn't being hoarded. So Paris it's becoming a real situation there. The revolts, remember we talked about the Bastille. We talked about the mayor of Paris was executed, and now the Paris Commune is leading Paris, and then the revolts in the streets of Paris, the National Guard there, led by Lafayette, to protect against the royal troops that had come to the city. All right, let's talk about moderate reforms. So the National Assembly ends special privileges. The Second Estate members of the National Assembly agree to do it. Feudalism is abolished. The Declaration of the Rights of Man. This is the Declaration of Independence, but for the French Revolution. They talk about life, liberty, property, security, quote, life, equality, fraternity. This is very much like Jefferson's draft of the Declaration of Independence. This is very much influenced by John Locke and the Enlightenment. They talked about equal rights for men here too. We'll talk about what voting looks like with electing the National Assembly in a second. You know what? Real quick, with that National Assembly. It's the Constitution. We'll get there. My bad. Moderate reform. So women march on Versailles. This is a little less moderate. This is a little bit more extreme. The women of Paris, they cry out, bread, bread, bread. They march from Paris to Versailles. They demand that King Louis and Marie Antoinette, who they don't like, they think she spends too much money. They think she's a foreigner. She's a foreigner, but they don't like her. And they demand that the king returns to Paris, which he does. He returns. These peasant women return all the way to Paris with the king in tow. Can you imagine that? That's pretty good. Maybe not my most professional lesson recap ever. Anyway, National Assembly. It moves to Paris as well. There's what's called the Civil Constitution of the Clergy, and that puts the French the Catholic Church under state control. It abolishes recognition of the Pope in Rome. The Pope, the bishops, the cardinals, they all hate it. Constitution of 1791, it limits the monarchy. It says that the Legislative Assembly is the governing body. All tax-paying males are entitled to a vote. So that's not all males, and that's obviously all females are left out, but tax-paying males can vote under that. So that's a change. That's a change in the liberal direction, but it's not radical. It's very, very moderate. And Louis starts to realize, this situation's not looking good, and he tries to escape. But a peasant in the countryside has money. With Louis, he has his own money, meaning, to paraphrase or steal from a movie, he has his own money, and this peasant sees the money, sees his image, looks at the man he's looking at and says, that's King Louis. And so he has to go back to Paris, and this is really the beginning of the end for Louis XVI. What moderate reforms did the National Assembly enact? The Declaration of the Rights of Man, the Constitution 1791 that calls for a constitutional monarchy. So the monarchy is still there, so that's moderate, and extending the right to vote to all tax-paying men. Reaction outside of France is not good. The idea, the kings of these other European countries worry about French plague. Nobility, emigres, are fleeing out of France, and they're telling all these terrible stories about these popular uprisings. Two countries, Prussia and Austria, get together on the Declaration of Pillnitz. I may not have spelled that correctly there. If not, that's my bad. And they go to war with France. So you have internal division. You have your sans-culottes, the working class men. Culottes are fancy pants, literally fancy pants, breeches, that the upper bourgeoisie wear. The sans-culottes are not the bourgeoisie, they're the peasants. So they don't own culottes because they don't own fancy pants because they're not wealthy enough to, so they're known as the sans-culottes. They demand a republic where maybe every male has a right to vote. And you get the Jacobins, I call them Jacobins because that's what my high school teacher called them. John Green calls them Jacobins. The Jacobins are the more extremist, radical members of the National Assembly. April 1792, France declares war on Austria, Prussia, Britain, others say, hey, we don't like tyrants anywhere. Forget just France. And so they declare war on all their neighbors. Probably not a good time for that. We'll close today. You want to think about how are the people responsible for this revolution? What actions did they take throughout this presentation? While I was eating bread, I was also talking about things that people did to further the revolution. So you want to think about that. So that's our lesson recap, Creating a New France.